Hey all, and welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports in the NFL Week 10 DFS Slate Playbook here on the channel. Today is Saturday, November 14th, 2020, and we're talking specifically NFL DFS for this upcoming Sunday's main slate, both on FanDuel and DraftKings. We're going to cover quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all positions, the core plays, the best plays, basically players that I believe you should be building your lineups around to be successful this Sunday in NFL DFS. So sit back, relax, grab some pen and paper to take notes. Let's talk NFL DFS. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Hey guys, what's up? Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Welcome back to another week here talking NFL specific DFS. We are, of course, talking for tomorrow's Sunday main slate, Week 10. We do have a lot to cover here. I think it's both an interesting but difficult slate. So we will talk all that here on the channel. And I thank you guys, as always, so much for finding your way here, clicking on this video in particular. Hopefully you're here because you like DFS. Hopefully you're here because you want to continue to win at DFS, NFL DFS, here with No Huddle Fantasy Sports. We've been running hot for most of this season, really. Every single week we've landed some major plays, picked out some specific players that have been low owned but have absolutely broke the slate, and we've been on them. So please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. It's the only way you're going to be up to date and know when these videos come out. And if you enjoy these videos, please consider giving them a like, thumbs up, all that good stuff that you hear preached in pretty much every single YouTube video. It's done because it does help support the channels, help support especially lower, smaller subscriber channels such as this one. So I do really appreciate you guys being here. Let's get started. Let's talk about the slate outlook for this upcoming Sunday, Week 10. We have 11 total games, pretty typical there. Again, the most important thing with 2020 NFL DFS is to stay up to date with the illnesses, with the players, with the teams, with what's going on. I know specifically a couple things. I know the Steelers have returned, like Big Ben Roethlisberger. I believe today, or as of Friday, he came back to practice. Maybe it was today, Saturday. Either case, those are things you want to pay attention to. Obviously, the guy hasn't practiced most of this week. What does that mean? You're going to have to sort through that. But there are, of course, other teams. I believe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a couple wide receivers, not big names, but they did have wide receivers that did test positive, so they're going to be out. Again, just make sure you look into all of that. Make sure you're not playing players that are a part of that or possibly going to miss time. In addition to that, make sure you're considering if guys are just returning from things, that they have enough practice, they have enough that it makes it worth playing them in DFS. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that. We've talked about it every single week. It's up to you guys. I can only give you so much on these videos. You're going to have to make sure you check the news feeds, all that stuff for this specific year. But outside of that, what are we looking at? What's the slate outlook? I've gone through a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different things. I mentioned already, this is a more difficult slate. I think ownership will be spread out on quarterback, which is good. There are a couple of guys I'm really interested in, one of which is going to be higher owned. But again, I think there's a lot of guys on this slate that are going to attract ownership. So you don't have to really worry about chalky plays, basically, at quarterback. It's always a good thing in DFS. Besides that, though, this week, I'm going to be favoring home running backs. I'm going to be trying to pay up at running back. There are some mega chalk running backs for sure compared to quarterbacks. But in general, the guys I am going to be paying up for are the guys I'm most interested in this week, Week 10. Outside of that, in terms of running backs, value is looking very bleak. There's a couple of guys, Mike Davis being one of them, Duke Johnson being the other guy, are the only real ones that stand out as value plays in okay spots. And I don't really think Mike Davis is in a good spot. Those guys are going to garnish a ton of ownership. So for the most part, I will give you some information on value running backs. Again, my strategy this week is if they're going to garnish all the ownership, I'm going to go away from that, pivot away from that, and pay up at running back. So that's kind of the strategy here. Outside of that, to just move quickly through the rest of this, consider QB wide receiver value stacks. That's how I'm going to fit in these more expensive running backs. Even if you're going to play a quarterback that's expensive, I believe there's moves to be made at wide receiver in terms of their stacks that'll help lower that ownership, both on the QB stack as a whole, but also save you some salary. We'll talk about all of that. And then beyond that, I'm looking at mid-price to higher-price tight ends. That's typically not the play for me, the strategy for me, but I think this is a week to do that. It also fits kind of some of the builds and some of the comebacks I want for players this week. But outside of that, that is the slate outlook for this week. As always, we want to talk very quickly Vegas totals. These will change. In fact, some of these have changed dramatically. I think the Buffalo game at Arizona has already moved several points. Some of the most movement we've seen in years in terms of Vegas totals, that coming from that game specifically. So I'm going to give you what I have now. These things will change. I'm recording this early on Saturday. By the time you watch it, it could either be Sunday or late Saturday night. Things can change. Nonetheless, you can expect most of these games to be relatively close to what we're looking at here. And it does give us an idea, as always, when we look into Vegas, it helps us plan ahead, set the table for where a lot of DFS and a lot of fantasy scoring will occur or not occur. Could be the other way around. But you can see here some of the things I wanted to highlight. Tampa Bay, Green Bay, Arizona, New Orleans, and Los Angeles Rams are all some of the more higher projected teams. Green Bay being the only team above 30 in terms of an implied team total. Besides that, you have the Tampa Bay, Carolina game. You have the Buffalo, Arizona, San Francisco, New Orleans, and then Seattle, Los Angeles Rams game. All those games are projected pretty much at or above 50 in terms of an implied, or in terms of an over-under in that game. So lots of fantasy goodness there. All things to consider. Last but not least here, you're looking at like San Francisco, Jacksonville, Cincinnati, and Washington, all projected below 20 in terms of a team total, and the New York Giants sitting at 20.5. So those are teams you may want to pick a player from, but you definitely, in my opinion, want to stay away from stacking and fitting a lot of players, focusing on in terms of those games. So nonetheless, stuff you want to consider as we jump into this week. So let's start it off right, as always, with the quarterback's position. We have two guys we're going to talk about here. Josh Allen and Drew Lock. One guy, specifically Drew Lock, we're going back to the well. Last week worked out very well. But the first guy I do want to mention is Josh Allen. He is expensive, $8,700 on FanDuel, $75 on DraftKings, playing on the road this week in Arizona. The good thing here is A, he's on the road. We like to take road quarterbacks. B, it's a 56 over-under, one of the highest, if not the highest on the slate. So in addition to that, Buffalo is a slight road underdog at 1.5 with a good, very good 27.5 implied team total. What does all that mean? If just focusing just on that Vegas perspective, you have a quarterback on the road here, a good quarterback in a high scoring projected game with a close spread and a high implied team total, meaning this game's going to go back and forth should it stick to what Vegas is projecting here, and it's going to be a lot of scoring. So we want to definitely get exposure to this game. I definitely am interested in Josh Allen here. Mentioned already, slight road dog with a good implied team total. He had a very good bounce back performance in week 9. If you go before that, it's been scary playing Josh Allen. He has not been that good. He actually had 3 or 4 weeks there where he was not good at all in terms of fantasy football. I think the Buffalo Bills did struggle too in general in terms of a football perspective. But in general, last week, week 9, you saw a really, really good bounce back performance from Josh Allen. Comfortable enough to go back to him this week if you're looking at, this game specifically. So definitely interested in Josh Allen. I'm definitely interested based upon the fact that he looked good in week 9 and should be returning to form here. Always offers a solid floor. That's something with Josh Allen. That's something with a lot of quarterbacks this year that really do help you in DFS. Specifically, you're looking at 28 rushing attempts over his last 3 games. Really, really good, attractive thing there. Again, it sets that floor. If he's going to get 5 to 10 rushing attempts per game, you're going to get so many points just out of the gate, basically guaranteed on the ground there. In addition to that, the good thing is he's also running the ball within the red zone. So if you're a Zach Moss or a Singletary guy, that's not looking too good. But if you're looking at Josh Allen, you're looking at 5 red zone attempts over his last 3 games in the red zone, meaning pretty much every game he's getting 1 or 2 attempts, or he's trying to run the ball once or twice in the red zone. Really, really good floor, again, offered from both of those perspectives. Besides that, I talked about how this is a really high-scoring game. Part of that reason is it's the projected highest-paced game. Going to be a really, really fast game between both of these teams that like to run no huddle. They like to run the ball, or I should say run plays very, very quickly. Both of them match up in terms of fast-paced very well. I think you're going to see a lot of scoring and a lot of volume in this game. It's really, really good for DFS. Besides that, some other ancillary things I like to focus on for quarterback. He has the second best pass blocking advantage according to Pro Football Focus at plus 30%, meaning he should have time in the pocket. And historically, if you look, when Josh Allen has time, he does a ton of damage in the pocket. So we do like that there. And then in terms of Arizona, the defense he's facing, there's nothing crazy to look at here. They're pretty much middle of the road in everything. That's passing yards per game, completion rate allowed, and fantasy points per game given up to quarterbacks. There's nothing, drastically bad about them. There's also nothing that you would say, man, they're an elite defense versus quarterbacks. So in general, I'm not scared of that defensive matchup. The last thing I will mention here, secondary for Arizona is graded 23rd overall in football by Pro Football Focus. So if you like to look at those grades, pretty much they're a bottom 10, bottom third of the NFL in terms of their secondary. Not very good. Josh Allen in a great spot in my opinion, all the reasons I just mentioned. The other guy I want to talk about is Drew Lock. Again, we're going back to the well here. Played him last week. 2 weeks in a row now, both week 9 and week 8. This guy did not look good in the first half and came back and just blew it out of the water, blew his salary out of the water in the second half of the game. So hopefully we don't get that type of, heart attack type of a play out of him this week. We get a just consistently good game out of him. Nonetheless, Drew Lock is getting it done, and his salary is what we like with him right now. It's $7,100 on FanDuel, $55 on DraftKings. Really, really good number there. Really good salary on DraftKings in my opinion. On the road, again, we always like to take quarterbacks on the road if we can, if the matchup makes sense. It does here on the road in Las Vegas. 50.5 over under, above 50, a game that should see some scoring. We do like that too. Denver is a slight, I would say more than slight, just a field goal or more underdog here at plus 4.5 with a 23 implied team total. That implied team total is not ideal, but nonetheless, it's still a solid one. It's right in that range that we don't consider elite, but we also don't consider bad. Again, you're looking at a guy in Drew Lock. We played him last week. He did very, very well. In fact, if you played Drew Lock last week, you had a chance to take down some tournaments. He had some very low ownership and he may have put up the best performance, definitely the best value performance in terms of dollars spent to money or dollars spent to points scored, but he may have actually put up the best performance overall. He did have a rushing touchdown. I don't think we can always expect that, but nonetheless, back-to-back here, great performances. The dude's turning into form. I do like Drew Lock generally. I think he's going to be a good quarterback for Denver. Nonetheless, again, affordable value play here. Those salaries can definitely be blown out of the water based upon his recent performances, and again, based upon the matchup here versus Las Vegas. In addition to that, the volume has been crazy. He has a minimum of 40 passing attempts over his last 3 games. They do not have much of a rushing attack right now. The splits between passing and running for Denver right now are so heavily favored in the passing perspective, in the passing aspect of the game, that makes Drew Lock that much better of a play. Now, should it stay? Do we need 40 attempts out of him, 45 attempts out of him? No, we don't. Do we want that? Yes. I think I don't think we can expect that every single week is what I'm saying, but he can still hit value, still pay off at his salary when he gets 30 to 35 attempts, which I think is more realistic here. Anything above that, like 40 or more, is just more money, more icing on the cake here. In addition to all of that, something that's very surprising here is Drew Lock has been running the ball a lot. He has 17 rushing attempts over his last 4 games. Again, that just like Josh Allen, I'm not saying he's Josh Allen, but he sets a little bit more of a floor, really helps, pay off in terms of his salary with those extra rushing attempts. Have to like that there. Again, we want to talk about Drew Lock's salary, but we want to talk about the matchup here. This matchup with Las Vegas is better than it was in Week 9. And if we were comfortable playing Drew Lock in Week 9, will we best damn be comfortable playing him this week versus a worse team, a worse secondary in Las Vegas? So we're going right back here. Again, a lot of other things we want to consider, just like Josh Allen. Solid pass blocking advantage at plus 24%, meaning he should have some time in the pocket. He shouldn't be scrambling around like crazy. And then finally, the big aspect, in addition to his salary, is the matchup. Las Vegas allows 267 passing yards per game. That's 26th overall in NFL. Las Vegas allows the 8th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And finally, last but not least here, one of the most attractive things about this defense is Pro Football Focus has graded them 31st overall in terms of their secondary. So they are really, really struggling. They have some young guys they drafted, some injuries in their secondary. Kind of a mess in terms of Las Vegas' secondary and their ability to stop the pass. Drew Lock is in a great position this week. Any quarterback would be in a great position this week. But Drew Lock, based upon the last couple of games, based upon his salary, based upon the rise of Jerry Jeudy, a lot of factors here make me really, really like Drew Lock. Coming back to him this week, hopefully we still see some lower ownership on him and at a lower salary here, a salary that we can definitely find value with. Moving over to the running back position, I mentioned already, I'm going to be paying up mostly where I can. Players like Drew Lock make that happen this week. Two guys I'll quickly mention here, Aaron Jones and James Conner, both stand out to me as two of the more expensive backs on the slate, but two of the most, best position backs on this slate. Starting with Aaron Jones, $8,800 on FanDuel, $7,100 on DraftKings, playing at home versus Jacksonville. The game only has a 47.5 over-under. The Green Bay Packers are all of those points pretty much at minus 13.5 in terms of a home favorite, 31.5 implied team total. So a lot of points expected for this Green Bay Packers team. Really puts Aaron Jones in a great spot here. Now, because he's playing at home, because of that spread and all of the factors there, he checks every box that we want from a DFS running back. He's a huge home favorite. He has a high implied team total. The snap count for him is 65, 66% on a typical non-injury, non-return from injury game. He gets used in the running game, he gets used in the passing game, and then the matchup is also good. So all boxes are checked for Aaron Jones here. Now, if you look at game logs, his touches have been, for the most part this year, floating between like 15 and 20. Ideally, in a matchup like this, as long as he's healthy, we're begging that he gets above 20. We want 20, 25, 30 touches out of him. I'm not sure we're going to get that there. If that scares you away, I understand it. All of that put together, he's going to be a chalkier play too. A lot of guys are talking about him. So if you want to go away from him, I understand. But I think he's definitely, I can't not put him on this video. He's in a great spot, a smash spot, and everything ticks for him, right? All the boxes are checked. The matchup is great. Basically, when we look for a DFS running back, the things I preach on this channel for your DFS selection of running backs, Aaron Jones meets this week. Now, talking about week 9, I think there's some positives to take from that. His performance wasn't ideal, but again, he got hurt, I believe, in week 7. In week 8, he did not play. So this was his post-injury return, and we saw him get nearly 70% of the snaps. That is a good positive. That's something we want to see. I think we want to see 70+% of snaps out of Aaron Jones this week versus Jacksonville at home. Other things to consider here, the offense-defensive line run blocking matchup is heavily favored for Green Bay here at plus 21%, meaning it's a good opportunity for any running back in that backfield. And all of the things for Jacksonville in terms of their defense, they're average at run stopping. Any stat you look at, it's not very good. It's not great. It's not bad. They're just kind of middle of the pack, and they really have not played any running back like Aaron Jones, any team like Green Bay. So I think it's heavily skewed based upon their schedule. Nonetheless, there's nothing that stands out as scary for this Jacksonville defense. Jacksonville also allows 4.5 yards per carry, a mark that's good to focus on in terms of how many yards basically they're giving up to running backs, not just per game, but on each individual carry. That ranks 17th. Again, kind of middle of the pack, lower half of teams. And then they're allowing, this is what stands out to me, the 7th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So again, really, really good matchup here. All boxes are checked for Aaron Jones this week. A guy I probably like more personally, but I'm heavily biased being a Steelers fan, James Conner here, playing at home versus Cincinnati at $7,600 on FanDuel, $69 on DraftKings. Again, playing at home this week, 46 over/under for this game. Not the best, but again, it's a team in Pittsburgh that likes to establish the run. They're obviously excellent this year. They just want to get in, get out, get their W. I think it's a great spot versus Cincinnati this week to do just that with James Conner. They're heavy favorites at minus 6.5 over a touchdown with a 26.0 implied team total. So the implied team total is good. It's not ideal. It's not above 30. You're not going to get that very often. It's not like Green Bay, but nonetheless, it's not a low total. There's going to be points scored by this Pittsburgh team at home. And again, James Conner, just like Aaron Jones, is somebody that checks all boxes. In fact, I believe James Conner checks more boxes here just based upon his usage and the fact that he tends to get more carries than Aaron Jones. Solid home favorite, good implied team total, has a good snap count. He gets used in the run and the passing game, and the matchup here is ideal. It's so juicy versus the Cincinnati team. Again, I think that's the reason I like James Conner more. Nonetheless, both of these guys in play, great spots this week. Finally, the thing that stands out to me for James Conner this week, people played him a lot last week versus Dallas. He was more or less a bust. I played him. I think I even recommended him. This week, as a result, you're going to see less than 10% ownership, at least as projected right now. This is a great spot to play James Conner, in my opinion. Go right back to the well here. Pivot off of those people that are scared to play him now. He's going to be in a great spot, in a great matchup. You know what the stats are. James Conner is going to excel this week versus Cincinnati. The offense and defensive line run is an advantage of Pittsburgh right now at plus 8%. It's not huge, but it still shows you that they are slightly at an advantage here. The running backs, that offensive line too. The smash spot versus the run weak defense is the key though. Cincinnati's run defense is graded 28th overall out of 32 teams. 28th in the NFL. They're allowing a massive 5.2 yards per carry. That is by far the most in the NFL. I don't know actually if there's another team that's above 5. Cincinnati sits at 5.2. Again, smash spot for James Conner. And finally here, the last thing I will mention in terms of fantasy points given up to running backs per game, they're ranked 9th. So they're giving up a ton of points. They're top 10 matchup for fantasy points scored. They're number 1 in yards per carry. They're bottom 4, whatever, in terms of their grade as a run stopping defense. Great smash spot for James Conner. Don't be scared to go back to him this week. 2 other running backs, a little bit iffy here on both of them. First, I will mention Miles Sanders, $7,700 on FanDuel, $6,400 on DraftKings. He's playing on the road at New York against the Giants, 44.5 over/under. Philadelphia is a slight favorite on the road at -3.5 with a 24 implied team total. The issue here with basically all running backs is outside of the first 2 guys that I mentioned, there are not very many options. There's not very many value plays that I'm interested in. These guys stand out to me. I think they're both in play here. Miles Sanders is in play for a couple of reasons. He's a slight road favorite here. It's a divisional game. They have to win this. Philadelphia is very, very squarely in the playoff race, even though all teams in this division are just horrendously bad. Philadelphia is in the race right now. They're going to rely on Miles Sanders as a road favorite here. He should be fully healthy. He mentioned he's 100% healthy. He obviously missed the last game or 2 due to some injury scare, but nonetheless should be returning fully healthy here, and he sees an elite snap count when he does play. So yes, again, he's on the road here. The game logs for him are not great. The matchup itself is not on paper the best matchup, but we're playing the talent here. We're playing the snap counts. We're playing the guys that are getting on the field and going to be in the best opportunity. I believe Miles Sanders represents that here. Again, 80% snap count. That's an elite snap count for a running back. If you look prior to this injury, the dude was basically turning into an elite back from every facet. He was averaging 7 yards per carry over the last 3 games before he went down. He was getting a lot of usage in the passing game. He's pretty much game flow independent. This dude is on the verge of being one of the best top 5 elite backs in the game. It's just Philadelphia and the team he plays for. You know how they just in general just can't get their head out of their ass. But nonetheless, Miles Sanders in a great spot in my opinion this week. The last thing I will mention here is, yes, already I talked about how it is a tough matchup on paper. The Giants are one of the better teams in most stats versus the run, but Miles Sanders still excelled in a similar spot, if not a worse spot, versus a great defense in Pittsburgh, a great run-stopping defense in Pittsburgh. They shut down Saquon Barkley, but they still got destroyed by Miles Sanders. So don't worry too much about the matchup. Focus on the stats that I mentioned. 80% snap count, fully healthy, divisional important game they have to win. This is how they're going to win games, is using Miles Sanders. So don't be afraid to play Miles Sanders this week. He's a guy that's going to slip under the radar, be lower owned, really probably lower owned than most running backs. And I think Miles Sanders still sets up to be in a good spot this week in Week 10 DFS. The other guy I'll mention here, I am really interested in Chase Edmonds going back to the well here if Drake is in fact out. We do not know yet. It's a game time decision, but Chase Edmonds would be one of my first mentioned backs if we had more information. We don't have that information on Drake yet, but I will talk about Chase Edmonds and why I like him should Drake be out. So $7,100 on FanDuel, $63 on DraftKings. He's playing at home versus Buffalo, 56 over/under. All the things I mentioned with Josh Allen apply here, right? It's a high-scoring, projected Vegas game. It's going to be a close game. It's going to be a fast game, back and forth. The implied team total for Arizona is 29. That's the second highest, nearly 30 in terms of an implied team total. All things that favor fantasy goodness for this Arizona-Buffalo game. Again, the focus here for Chase Edmonds, though, is fully dependent upon Drake missing Week 10. I assume he's going to miss. He says he's a game time decision. We'll see how that plays out, but let's assume he does miss this game. You're going to see a drop in ownership this week in Chase Edmonds. He was a very heavily owned chalky play last week for good reason, and he didn't bust, but he didn't have the game that you had expected. As a result, I think you're going to see ownership come down because of that Week 9 performance and because of the ancillary chance that Drake will play. As a result, that's a great spot to go right back, pivot, find a running back in a smash spot that no one's going to own. This is your guy here. It's an elite matchup, believe it or not, versus this Buffalo run defense. For years, Buffalo has been known as having a great defense, a great run-stopping defense. It's just not the case this year, and we are 10 weeks into the season. You have a lot of data to support that they're just not doing a very good job stopping the run. As a result, Chase Edmonds, Kenyon Drake, whoever's playing, if you know that for a fact, they're in a good spot this week. I mentioned already, high-scoring, fast-paced game basically means more volume, more opportunity to score, just more touches for all players, all DFS players here. Good things when you see those numbers. He had 28 total touches. That's Chase Edmonds in week 9. 25 on the ground with rushes and 3 receptions. Those are crazy good numbers. He played a ridiculously high snap count. All of this comes back into play here with Drake being missing in week 10. If Drake is in fact in, though, I can't stress it enough. If Drake's in, it screws up this whole talk here. So please make sure you check that. Don't just play Edmonds without first knowing that Drake is in fact out. In addition to those 23 touches, or 28 touches I should say, he had 3 of those being red zone attempts. So he's getting the looks, he's getting the carries in the red zone when he's the only guy in that backfield. He suffered the same issue that basically Drake suffered all year long. He's getting some red zone attempts, but more often than not, it's Kyler Murray that's scoring that red zone. You know, he pulls that option out and runs the ball in. So that does hurt him at times, but nonetheless, we're sticking with the numbers. We're sticking with the strategy here. Chase Edmonds is a good play nonetheless. Offense and defensive line matchup is really good at plus 27%, meaning that the run blocking here is a really good spot for the Arizona team. They shouldn't have much issue establishing the run. And then in terms of that Buffalo defense, I talked about how surprisingly bad they are versus the run. They're allowing 4.5 yards per carry. That's 25th overall in the NFL, not very good. And their rushing defense is graded dead last according to Pro Football Focus. Very, very surprising there, but it's something that we now know 9-10 weeks into the season. Buffalo is a team you can't attack on the ground. So I'll mention it one last time. Chase Edmonds is a great, wonderful play at low ownership should Kenyon Drake be out. Just make sure you pay attention to that news. Bumping over to wide receivers here, we're going to start with the guy that we've basically had on these videos week in and week out. That's Keenan Allen, $7,800 on FanDuel, $71 on DraftKings, playing on the road in Miami, 48.5 over-under. The Chargers are slight road underdogs at plus 2.5. They have a 23 implied team total. So none of the numbers are extremely good. The numbers themselves are the main reason I'm not heavily considering Herbert again this week in terms of a stack with Allen. I still like Herbert. I didn't mention him on my first 2 guys for quarterback. Herbert is still, I think, in play, but the numbers just don't support me enough right now to go heavy on Herbert. Nonetheless, Keenan Allen is still a must play. He added another double-digit target game last week. We talked about him. We had him on this exact same video for week 9. Every single game with Herbert, if you don't count the one game where Keenan Allen got injured very quickly, every single game Keenan Allen has gotten double-digit targets. He's a dominating receiver right now. Literally an elite receiver without the elite salary. So you have to continue to take advantage of that, even if he's going to be chalky. And he's still not going to be chalky. You're still seeing like 12 to 15% ownership. He's still floating in that range. Everybody's going everywhere else. I still like Keenan Allen. I'll still keep going back there. The good thing is Herbert, the Chargers, their running game has been really bad. Kelly is now, I think, the only guy left in that backfield, or I'm not even sure who else they're starting because Jackson got hurt, Eckler got hurt, and as a result, you're seeing this heavy passing attack from the Chargers. In fact, they have 40 passing attempts in each of their last 3 games. So you're going to see tons of volume, and you have a guy here in terms of Keenan Allen that has the second highest NFL target share of 30%. So just do the math. If they're throwing the ball 40% or 40 times a game and he's getting 30% target share, you're going to get double-digit targets week in and week out with those results. He is a slight road dog here, but nonetheless, it's versus a very weak passing defense, so they should continue to pass the ball. The mashup in terms of wide receiver cornerback, according to Pro Football Focus, is plus 30%, heavily in his favor here. He's a top 5 rated wide receiver just in terms of grade, in terms of on the season. Keenan Allen is considered one of the best receivers according to Pro Football Focus. And then the final stat here, not that you need anything else, he's top 10s in yards per route run at 2.28. So smash spot for Keenan Allen again this week versus Miami. The salary just continues to not really go up for him. Creeps up a little bit, but he's still squarely in play based upon the targets he's getting, based upon the usage he's getting, and the matchup here. I do really like Terry McLaurin this week. I played him time and time again throughout. We've mentioned him here and there. The thing with him is, despite the quarterback situation, whoever is starting at quarterback, Scary Terry continues to perform. He is just an elite talent. He's in a similar spot to what Allen Robinson was in, whereas he had a bad quarterback that just could not connect with him. Nonetheless, was an elite talent when he got the ball. He still was able to do stuff with that. So you're getting that out of Terry here. He's $7K on FanDuel, $68 on DraftKings. Price is very reasonable. Both of these guys, I'm not giving you those high expensive price guys because you don't need to spend up to them this week. I suggest spending up at running back and fitting these mid to lower price wide receivers in. He and Washington are playing on the road here at Detroit with a 46 over under. Washington is a slight road underdog at 3.5 with a pretty abysmal 18.5 implied team total. But it does not matter for McLaurin here. We're still going to play him. Again, performing despite the QB situation, reasonable salary, yet he's an elite talent. It's a great spot. It's a smash spot in my opinion. Great matchup. And in terms of actually focusing on Pro Football Focus and what they consider in terms of wide receiver cornerback matchups, McLaurin is in the best matchup on the slate at plus 42%. So huge advantage in favor of him this week. Even without that, I'd still be interested. He's top 10 on this slate in terms of target share at 28%. He leads the NFL with 45% of team air yards for Washington, top 10 in yards per route run at 2.25. And then finally, the matchup here I mentioned is elite. Detroit's secondary is rated 30th overall out of, think about it, only 32 teams. So really bad grade there for that Detroit secondary. We don't care who's playing a quarterback. It seems like Terry still gets the ball. Scary Terry still is able to perform. All of the numbers support him being an elite talent. The salary itself is only $7K, 68 on DraftKings. So we're going to go there this week. He's one of my favorite receivers to slightly pay up for, all things considered. Two other receivers worth considering here. Both of these guys match up with the stack with the quarterbacks I already talked about. First being Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, he's my favorite play. Similar to last week with Drew Lock. $5,800 on FanDuel, $56 on DraftKings. Playing on the road at Las Vegas, 50.5 over under. Denver is a slight underdog here at plus 4.5 with a 23 implied team total. Really, this is just the same thing as last week. You're going to pair him with Drew Lock. He's a value price, and considering his recent performance, he's an extremely good price. And the guy is basically supporting himself as a true wide receiver one. He remains really low in terms of ownership. We do like that. That ownership between Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy should be really low, making it a really great tournament play in my opinion. Career high 14 targets in week 9. The week before that, he set his career high in terms of targets at like 10 or 12. So this guy has back-to-back weeks of double-digit targets. Really good coming into his own. Mentioned him already as a true wide receiver one with a price that is just way too low. It's going to start to go up here very soon, so we should take advantage of that while we can. 24 targets over his last 2 games. Talked about how he had 14 in week 9, 10 in the week prior. 29% target share and 47% of the team air yards in his last 2 games. That's pretty elite. That's actually, in fact, that is elite. Compared to some of the guys we already talked about, Jerry Jeudy, since the last couple of weeks, has really been coming into his own. We're going to continue to ride that wave here. And then it's an elite matchup. On top of all of that, everything I mentioned for Drew Lock applies here for Jerry Jeudy versus this Las Vegas secondary that's graded 31st in the NFL. One of the worst teams, one of the worst secondaries overall in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. So Jerry Jeudy in an excellent spot here in Week 10 to pair perfectly with Drew Lock. And then, to save some money here, I'm not saying you should not play Diggs or should not play John Brown. In fact, I love Diggs this week. I think he's an excellent play, an excellent pairing with Josh Allen. Just simply understand everybody's going to play Josh Allen with Diggs. We can pivot off of that, and I think it's a great spot to do that here with Cole Beasley. Very affordable, cheap price, $5,400 on FanDuel, $47 on DraftKings, playing on the road this week in Arizona, 56 over under. Buffalo is I told you, it's a back and forth game, 27.5 implied team total. They're underdogs at plus 1.5. It's going to be a super high, fast-paced game. Again, Cole Beasley is the guy, the wide receiver that you pair with Allen that offers great value in terms of both his performance that's expected and the price on him and Josh Allen. The Josh Allen stack, if you stack Cole Beasley with Josh Allen, it becomes a great price and great ownership pivot. Again, I'll just try to quickly summarize this. If you play Josh Allen and Diggs, it's a very, very expensive stack, and it's a stack that a lot of people will own. If you play Josh Allen and Cole Beasley, guess what happens? The price of that stack drastically goes down, and the ownership on that combination is also lower. So we're trying to play some tournaments here. We're trying to take advantage of this stuff. Cole Beasley in a great spot, in my opinion, all things considered. Correlates well with Josh Allen. I mentioned that here. Basically, when Josh Allen is hot, Cole Beasley is also doing well. So we can have faith in that here, that if we expect Josh Allen to do well, we're going to see some Cole Beasley action here, and him also to be in a great spot to do well. You don't need a ton out of him. He's very, very cheap, very affordable, but I think we still see possibly even double-digit target upside that we saw earlier this season. A couple other things here that I think supports Cole Beasley, really supports the whole Josh Allen play, whole pass offense of Buffalo in general. They're at a 60-40 split right now in terms of pass run, so they're throwing the ball a ton. Their running back situation has kind of been ugly. It's really their run game is based upon Josh Allen. So in general, the wide receivers for this team, including Cole Beasley, are squarely in play in Arizona this week. And the reason I'm very comfortable putting Cole Beasley as one of my core plays this week is that Arizona, surprisingly, if you really dig into the numbers, they struggle versus inside receivers. Again, I don't think Diggs is going to be in a bad spot or in a bad matchup or not do anything, but I do think Cole Beasley is in an excellent spot matching up inside versus a team that simply struggles versus inside receiver. So Cole Beasley, one of my favorite plays this week at wide receiver. Moving on to the last two guys we want to mention, the last position really, we want to mention the tight end position. I'm kind of paying up here. These guys aren't super expensive, but in terms of tight ends and what we've paid for most of the season, they are expensive. Nonetheless, I like both of them. Darren Waller here, $7,000 on FanDuel, $59 on DraftKings, playing at home versus Denver, 50.5 over under. Las Vegas is a slight favorite at home at -4.5 with a 27.5 implied team total. Now this play is, most of my stacks have a comeback player, meaning if I'm playing Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy, I got to come back with a Raider here. It's either Josh Jacobs or Darren Waller for me. For my recommendation, I'm going mostly Darren Waller in those comeback stacks. I think he's essentially on every slate a wide receiver 1. He's coming off a 10 target game in week 9. This guy is an elite talent, elite receiving option for this team. I think he lines up great this week versus Denver. Again, playing at home, which is a little bit crappy. You might favor Josh Jacobs there, but I still think Darren Waller is my favorite player to come back against that Drew Lock stack. Some things I think are very, very interesting to talk about for Waller here. First and foremost, he's 5th overall in the NFL, and that's not just tight ends, that's every position, include receivers, including running backs. He's 5th in the NFL with nearly 30% target share, 29%. Really, really impressive there. Basically a wide receiver 1, and then he's 2nd overall in the NFL with 15 total red zone targets. The only guy ahead of him is Devontae Adams. Not only is Darren Waller getting a good target share, a good percentage of the targets for his team, he's getting a ridiculously high number of red zone targets, meaning he can score when he gets the ball. So all good things there, all things we want to focus in on for our tight ends. 87% routes run percentage. Talk about making sure these guys are running routes when they're on the field, not just blocking. Darren Waller certainly is doing that. It's a great matchup in terms of Pro Football Focus at plus 21%. My personal opinion is it's a difficult matchup. Denver, whether you're focusing on points given up to tight ends or just generally what they do with tight ends in terms of defending them, I think it's a difficult matchup, so I'm not sure where Pro Football Focus is coming from. Nonetheless, I just wanted to point out they're giving it a favorable 27%. Even if it's a tough matchup, not tough matchup, it doesn't matter. This is an elite talent at wide receiver, essentially a wide receiver 1, as I mentioned. The other guy I will mention here is Evan Ingram. 56 on FanDuel, 45 on DraftKings, playing at home versus Philly, 44.5 over under. The Giants are home underdogs at plus 3.5 with a 20.5 implied team total. It's a good price. It's a good salary. You're finally starting to see this guy come into his own. I wouldn't even say come into his own because he's been in the NFL for a while. You're starting to see this guy start to see volume, which is what we expected if you drafted Ingram in season long. If you played him at all this season, he just hadn't. You're just not seeing a good usage of Evan Ingram for most of the season. The good thing is lately, the last couple of weeks, he's starting to see the uptick in volume, in usage, the things you want, and his price is still really low. So we're going to go there this week. He saw 9 targets in week 7 versus Philadelphia, so the same matchup playing on the road. Dude saw 9 targets. Since that time, he's had 9 targets, and then he had 2 games of double-digit targets. Double-digit targets, as I mentioned, in the last 2 games, 29 total targets over his last 3 games. That includes that Philly game. So, again, we're starting to see some usage, some bump in usage for Evan Ingram. We're now comfortable to go there. I think you're going to continue to see that. They're dumb if they're not going to utilize him as they should. He's a good talent. He's been a good receiver for them, a good tight end, a good receiving option, I should say. One other thing I will mention, over those last 3 games where you're seeing that bump in targets, you're also starting to see the bump in red zone targets. 5 total red zone targets over his last 3 games. So you're basically ensured that he's going to get 1 or 2 targets in the red zone. Hopefully we can find the actual end zone with one of those targets this week in a good spot versus Philly. Philly, finally, last thing I will mention, if you're into fantasy points given up per game, that matchup for a defense, Philly gives up a lot of points. 4th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. So should be an elite matchup here for Evan Ingram, a guy that's now seeing double-digit targets back-to-back weeks. I do like Evan Ingram. I'm willing to pay the price on him this week. So that wraps up our core plays. Let's move on to some other highlights here as always. Not a lot to talk about. Again, it's a difficult week. I'm pretty narrow on the plays I like. Not a lot of running backs I'm willing to go to outside of who I already mentioned. But nonetheless, some other guys I am considering. Deshaun Watson, a quarterback playing on the road in Cleveland. I think it's a really good spot for them. I mean, the Houston team is just not looking good. I think they only have 1 win. Nonetheless, Deshaun Watson continues to play elite football at the quarterback position. So good spot for him on the road this week versus a pretty weak Cleveland defense. Justin Herbert, just keep playing Justin Herbert. The dude's throwing the ball, I mentioned, like 45 times a game right now. They have no running game without Eckler. They have no running game now without Jackson. They're going to throw the ball a ton this week. Keenan Allen, great spot. The only thing that bothered me, I talked about it already. The reason I'm not listing Herbert up on my main 2 guys is simply the Vegas numbers aren't quite agreeing with the matchup, not quite agreeing with them scoring a lot of points. So that's the only thing to be concerned about. But this dude is an elite talent. I think he's going to be great for years and years to come. Justin Herbert squarely in play this week for the Chargers. I do like Josh Jacobs. So I talked about Darren Waller being the guy I want to come back against Drew Lock with. I'll also get some exposure to Josh Jacobs here. Checking a lot of boxes. Home favorite running back. They run the ball a lot. Gets a lot of usage. It's a tough matchup on the ground versus Denver. That's the only downside here. But nonetheless, Josh Jacobs in a great spot for Las Vegas this week. Duke Johnson is, I guess, the value back I would consider this week. It's a revenge narrative versus Cleveland, his former team. He got 15-16 rushing attempts last week, got a couple targets through the air. He's mostly a 3rd down back. That's why I'm a little scared to really invest too much into Duke Johnson here. But we did see some usage last week, a lot on the ground. So definitely a value play against a former team. A little bit of a narrative there. Melvin Gordon for Denver, if you're not playing that Drew Lock stack. Melvin Gordon, Lindsey, those guys are in good spots versus Las Vegas. They're struggling versus the run. You just have a road running back here. So something I'll mention is Melvin Gordon, definitely worth looking at. I don't know if I'll go there too often, but something to consider. In terms of wide receivers, Stephon Diggs. Again, I'm not telling you not to play Diggs. In fact, I'll play a lot of Allen's, Diggs, Beasley. But in general, Stephon Diggs is very, very squarely in play this week. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, I love both of those receivers in play this week. Although they're at home, Seattle is just giving up like 7 million yards per game through the air. A lot of receivers just doing massive damage. I believe Seattle's giving up the most points to the wide receiver position. So both Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods are in play. I do like Devontae Parker for Miami. I think his salary is low enough that it's worth taking a stab at. Has a good connection so far with Tua. We'll see if that continues. Devontae Parker in play. Same with Deontay Johnson. The scary part here is that passing offense is going to be maybe affected by the fact Big Ben didn't play much or practice much this week due to the testing procedures. But nonetheless, Deontay Johnson is a guy that continues to get double-digit targets, and his salary just continues to stay super low. So definitely a guy to consider there for Pittsburgh. And that really wraps it up. I hope you guys, again, enjoy these videos. If you're trying to set multiple lineups and you haven't already checked it out, Daily Fantasy Nerd is linked down in the description of this video. You get a free month. It's worth checking out. In fact, you can go over there and not do anything without signing. You can do a lot without signing up. You can see the layout. You can see how things are. I believe you can even generate one lineup per day without a subscription. So please make sure you check out Daily Fantasy Nerd. It's an affiliate link. If you end up signing up and subscribing to it, you know that it does help this channel. So I would really appreciate that. I can guarantee you will be a better daily fantasy player with that optimizer. It is certainly something I use every single week. The big weeks we've had is certainly because I've been able to utilize and leverage that optimizer in my favor any given week. So something I'm fully behind is Daily Fantasy Nerd. Please check it out. But besides that, again, thank you guys for tuning in here. I know these videos run a bit longer, but we contain a lot of information. We give you guys all the info you need to make a decision. I'm not just giving you guys the plays, giving you my favorite players. I'm also giving you the information as to why, so you can be educated and make your own decision as to whether or not you will play the players. So hopefully these videos are helpful. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Follow us at NoHuddleFS over on Twitter. And also make sure you give these videos a like if they're helpful. I wish you guys always the best of luck, including this week, Week 10 NFL. Besides that, I will catch you guys in the next video.